45 minutes to an hour with you, where I'll introduce something to you that I find extremely useful when working with my clients. It's called enterprise design thinking. Now, design thinking is a term that has been, recently thrown around a lot. What you're going to get out of this session is actually being able to call yourself an enterprise design thinking practitioner. And this beautiful badge that you see here, you're going to be able to claim that by the end of this course, where I'm going to be sharing with you a course where you can sign up and get this badge and show everyone on LinkedIn that now you know what is design thinking. Now, we're going to look at the enterprise design thinking, the principles, the loops, the key, the conversation that you would have, and how you would start running workshops. So by the end of this, you're going to be ready to go in and be able to create empathy map, create as-is scenarios, drive ideation, define storyboards, and put together prototypes, right? I hope we're going to have some time for Q&A as well, but I'd like to have this as an interactive session. So whenever you feel that you would like to ask me a question, please feel free to do so, which is a great segue to my next point. Show up as a student, right? And showing up as a student really means that you're not afraid to ask questions. There's nothing that is, well, this is a recorded session, but no one's going to hold anything against you that you say here. Any question that you ask, I'm going to do my best answering it. This is going to be a high intensity session, similar to how we have high intensity workouts. This is a high intensity session. Reason being, I started developing these courses and delivering them. They were 3-day sessions. They then ended up being 2-day sessions. The next session, it was a 1-day session. Slowly but surely, up until the point where by now, with 1 hour, and obviously the online learning that I'm going to share with you, I will be looking at 1 hour with you, which I hope by the end of which you're going to have the key principles down, and you're also going to be able to go and do the online self-paced learning. Okay. Now, usually what I do at this time, but we're going to skip that, is a social contract, but I'm going to introduce the concept of a social contract to you, right? A social contract is essentially, in this session, we socially write a contract in a way that we, for example, do not want to pick up our phones during the session. We do not want interruptions in the session. We want people to ask questions in the session. And here, maybe the first learning of today, the social contract is a great way to put your team, and even if you're working with a client team, on one table and ensure that everyone is abiding by the same value. What's in it for you? You're going to spend an hour here, by the end of which you're going to have templates and tools that you can start creating for yourself, right? And these templates and tools you can start using as of later in the afternoon. And also you can go to the self-paced learning, which will give you the badge. I hold myself to these principles of Albert Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So feel free to stop me. If it's not simple enough, broken down, feel free to stop me and ask me to explain it in a more simple way to make sure that we get everyone on the same page. Now, why enterprise design thinking? Why should we actually even bother about doing something called enterprise design thinking? The world we live in is by numbers, not the world we used to live in just 15, 20 years ago, right? The Internet of Things is not something that is a concept that isn't graspable anymore. If you look around you right now, you do a little stock take, you'll realize you'll have at least 2 devices, probably the device I'm speaking to you from right now, and at least another phone. Looking around me right now, I can see my wife's phone, I can see my phone, I can see another phone of mine. So I'm looking at 3 devices, right? As of 2020, we are expecting to have somewhere around 30 billion connected devices. That's 3.8 devices for every human being, right? Now, the if we look at these trends and these changes that we're seeing, especially with us being more and more connected, we can see that people are trying to be admitted into the room. We can see that the Internet of Things and the connected devices are everywhere, and they will create a disruption that is unprecedented, right? In a personal point of view, with personal devices, for example, your iWatch or your iPhone or whatever device you use, at home where maybe you have an Alexa, in an industrial setting where now devices and sensors are more available than they were before, an environmental setting where now it's much easier to track impacts to the environment, in a government point of view, and there particularly so to improve access to services, healthcare, where now we're able, and especially after the COVID times, we're now able to see doctors without actually seeing a doctor virtually. From a transport point of view, where if you're living in Dubai, there's the Road and Transport Authority, which now has all of their taxis and Kareems connected to central stations. From a buildings and infrastructure point of view, a lot of data is being generated by these devices, and they sit on layers among layers of new and what we're calling the fourth industrial revolution emerging technologies, right? So they are enabled by layers of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain, and other layers of technology. Now, through this number of devices and the amount of impact these devices have in our environment, we are now, and this, by the way, is an old number by now, we are expecting to have somewhere around 44 trillion gigabytes of information, of data being generated annually, right? I've been using this slide for God knows maybe a couple of years, but really I'd be lying if I'd understand how much a zettabyte is, which is why I always bring back this slide, because this is the type of world I understand, maybe even here. So I understand gigabytes and terabytes, petabytes, yes. You're starting to lose me at exabytes and zettabytes, and there's essentially 44 trillion gigabytes that are being created annually. So much so that a cow even is transmitting somewhere around 200 megabytes a year. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, in 2010, and again, a dated and consciously a dated quote here. In 2010 came out and said, there were 5 exabytes of information created between the dawn of civilization through to 2003. But now that much information is created every 2 days. Let's linger on that for a second. All of the civilizations we know, the Romans, the Pharaohs, the Ottoman Empire, the different empire, the Mongol Empire, the Egyptian Empire, every single empire that we know, every piece of history that we know fits into 5 exabytes of information. And now we're creating that much information every 2 days. And this is a 2010 reference. By now, it's more on a daily basis that much data is being created. The world we live in is simply not the world we live in today is simply not the world we used to live in. And I always like to take this picture, which is one of the most holy sites in Islam. Even that, look at what it looked like in 2009 and what it looks like in 2019. The world we live in is simply not the world we used to live in, and we need new tools to start dealing with this new world. All righty. What do you see when you see this picture? That's the point where you say something. You can use the chat if you're shy. What is it that you're seeing when you see this picture?
I see everyone's energy in the morning.
See everyone's energy in the morning. It's very philosophical of you, Melissa. I love it. Oh, for some reason I can't see the chat. Hold on. Is anyone talking to me on chat? Is anyone saying something on chat, Melissa?
Yes, Attila is saying transformation. Someone is saying coffee. It's okay. I'll tell you. So we have coffee, transformation, espresso.
Okay. Cool. All right.
Waste of resources.
All right. Okay. Peace of mind. I like it. All right. These are all good things that you're seeing, and I also see good design, and you know, probably a tasty bit of coffee. Now, if I were to ask you, is this a good picture to represent a cup of coffee, a good cup of coffee? Just yes or no. Is this a good picture to represent a good cup of coffee?
No.
No?
No.
Good. Any yeses?
Actually, to have a picture of a good cup of coffee is presenting the cup of coffee itself in a way that intimidate our senses and our love for coffee, not the machine behind the coffee.
Look, if I wouldn't have known any better, I say you've sat in this course with me before. Because yes, you're very right. What's your good name?
Mu'taz.
Mu'taz. Mu'taz, spot on, right? This looks like a good functional piece of coffee, but if I show you this,
yes,
if I show you this, and then I don't need to tell you that this is a good cup of coffee, right? You can see it in her face, the way she's cradling the cup, and the way she's actually enjoying this piece of coffee. Believe it or not, just now looking at this picture, and I've seen it a million times over, I felt like wanting a piece of coffee myself.
Me too.
So get one for yourself, Mu'taz. So what these two pictures tell us, and thank you, Mu'taz, for actually making the point for us, showing is better than telling, but feeling is better than showing. So when I feel this cup of coffee, it's much better than if I actually just show you that this is a good cup of coffee. The reason this is important is because your best experience that you've had anywhere becomes the minimum expectation that you have anywhere else. And think about, let's say, a bank that has a great app. A bank that has a great app, you'll ask yourself when you're going to the next bank, if they don't have a great app, why don't they have such a great app? Think about, well, something that probably we've all slowly but surely forgotten, traveling, right? If you go to an airline and they have this great online check-in experience, and then you go to the next airline and they tell you, oh, sorry, you can't check in online, your expectation will be, hey, why don't they have this? This other airline had it, right? And Henry Ford, it was, he said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? So sometimes you have to create this scale between what is it that someone is actively saying and what is it that they need, right? And here I'd like I'm not too sure if I'll be able to play the video here. So I'm going to try and show you this video. If the sound quality works, then well and good. If it doesn't, then I'm going to share the link with you. So let's give this a go for a couple of seconds. Can you guys hear this?
I can't hear anything.
You can't hear anything? All right, okay.
No.
Let's not then spend too much time on this. And let me share with you. I don't know why the chat function isn't coming up.
Maybe because you're sharing your screen.
Because I was sharing my screen, yes. Yeah. There we go. All right, okay. So do me a favor, quickly check out this this video, and let's come back here as soon as you finish this video.
Can I try to do it from my end? Do you mind?
I think it'll make more sense just not to lose time if
All right,
everyone watches
fine.
it by themselves. Alrighty, a quick sign of life. Have you been able to watch the video?
I did from my end, all of it. So I think
Okay,
I
perfect.
started late.
All right, perfect. So just quickly on the chat, is everyone back here again?
Yes, I'm seeing a lot of yeses, yes.
All right, perfect, wonderful. All righty, so that was Steve Jobs telling you about what he thinks of design and how he believes it's a loaded word and how he's not afraid to actually throw out something even after they've invested a lot of time and effort on it, right? And now we enter into enterprise design thinking, because it's taking everything that we heard before, and it's now going to give you a methodology of how you can address these changes, these changing requirements from people, and in this fast changing world that we're in, how to arrive at the best results. And this is applicable if you want to move, or this is applicable if you're solving a problem of any kind, or if you're developing a particular software or solution. Right, so let's demystify this. Enterprise design thinking, what is it? First of all, it's understanding and developing empathy for your users. And we're going to get to how we actually do this. But this is as an overall introduction for you guys, so you have a background to what this means. Next thing that you do is you explore and you generate potential solutions for your users' problems. So you build this empathy, you understand who your user is, you then go in to start trying to solve their issues depending on who the user is that you're dealing with. You then prototype to make sure that you actually have something that you can touch and feel to represent your ideas. And throughout the entire process, you do something called evaluation, where you play back your ideas, or you play back your prototype, or you play back your storyboard, or whatever it is that you're creating, to ensure that you're not going off by yourself, creating something and then going back to your user, but you're creating something for the user with the user. let's look at the principles of enterprise design thinking, the loop that we're going to follow, and the key. As we said earlier, showing is better than telling, but feeling is much better than showing. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is you need to focus on the human experience, because when you focus on the human experience, you will create things that are better for the person that you're working with. Obviously, you need to consider the business angle of this, especially if you're working in an environment, in a commercial environment. But what you will find is many times when you focus on a particular or solving a particular human experience, it will quickly come with a certain business benefit as well. If you are one or two people in your team, expand your team, expand it to a multidisciplinary, multimodal, multi-organizational team. If you're working for, let's say, the GIZ right now, or for a particular bank, ensure that you take them along the journey with you, using the tools that you will shortly have in front of you, because many perspectives generate more possibility. And sometimes, and that's something I stand behind very, very actively, the best way to actually learn something is to make a mistake, and very cheaply so. And this is also something that Steve Jobs alluded to, where he said he's not afraid to actually throw something out. The idea of design thinking is that by the end of this, you'll have tools to actually make mistakes, but in the cheapest way possible, while it's all on paper, or maybe a simple clickable prototype, rather than you creating full end-to-end working prototypes that then you will have to throw out of the window. Now, let's look at the principles. The user is your North Star, the most important person. And again, I don't want to take out, I work in a commercial world, in a business world. I don't want to take away that it's not important to have a business benefit. But what I'd like to implore on you is that sometimes, or many times, the business benefit and the user benefit are directly aligned. So when you make the user your North Star, when you have them as part of your team, and you measure your success to how much value you bring to your user, you will also have a business benefit, right? On stark contrast is just working off requirements that someone else developed. Obviously, you're working with businesses. There are certain requirements, but involves the user as part of this process using design thinking methodologies. Succeed or fail as a team. We touched upon the concept of multidisciplinary team. Your team shouldn't consist of CEOs and general managers only, or just developers, or just designers, or just business experts. Make sure that you have a multidisciplinary team, meaning different kind of multidisciplinary, right? Different kind of disciplines within the team. You have a project manager, you have a designer, you have a UX person, a UX person, an IX person. You have someone that is a developer that can actually create it. You have someone that is a business person from the client that you're dealing with. You have someone that is essentially your user, and there you succeed and you feel as a team, and you don't start assigning blame. You actually make sure that you learn from your mistakes and you move on. At any given time, with design thinking, you have a bias towards action. Do not get bogged down in too many discussions of how things should or shouldn't be done. Go on, create a prototype, make sure that it's something physical, however physical it is, if it's something that's clickable, if it's something that's a drawing on a paper, if it's a Lego, it's a piece of Lego that you've arranged in a way that you can touch and feel it. There is always a bias towards action. Throughout this, you constantly go through the loop. First thing that you do is you observe your surrounding and your user's surrounding, and you immerse yourself within their surrounding. You go speaking to your user, you sit next to them, you walk through the process as it is with them. You talk to them and identify what are their key pain points. After you observe, you reflect to ensure that you've captured everything that is within this user's experience, and you've captured it in a way that the user agrees with it as well, right? And this is the kind of environment that you would be in when you're standing there reflecting as a team. And back to the bias towards action, make sure that very early on, as soon as you come out with particular findings, you actually do something with them. Make them concrete, make them touchable, clickable, drawable, so you can discuss them with your users. And it's very simple, right? It doesn't need to be a very complicated prototype that is clickable, although there's many tools out there that you could create wireframes with very quickly. Let's say you're creating a mobile app. You could just pick up a pen and paper and, similar to what you're seeing here, develop something very quickly. And what, actually, to stay on this for a second, what we've seen is by, don't nail me down on the research, but I remember reading the research that users are more likely to give you feedback, critical feedback to what you're doing, if they see that it's a low fidelity prototype. But if they see that you've put a lot of time and effort into this, and this is an all dancing prototype, they'll feel maybe shy to, shoot down this great idea that you have, or this well-designed screen that you have. Whereas, if you do it on pen and paper really quick, something that you can just draw, throw away, draw again, and throw away again, you'll be able to gain much more feedback from them, right? So this is the constant loop that follows us throughout this enterprise design thinking methodology. Now, if we look at the keys,
excuse me.
Yes.
I'm sorry, before moving forward, I would love to ask about this kind of loop. Are we supposed to use it for a B2B model? Like, for example, are we supposed to prototype our ideas for the client themselves or the companies we're working with?
Yes, exactly. That's a very good question. And the short answer is yes. The idea is, and we're going to go into the actual tools that you're going to start using, is you actually develop empathy through a template. So there's a template that we'll shortly go through where you develop, it's called an empathy map, right? You're then going to, it seems to be that my battery is running low. Excuse me for a second, I'll change where I'm sitting. And let me continue answering while I'm getting to my charger. So you develop this empathy, you then actually start developing the prototype. You then draw out what are the current pain points in this particular problem. You then ideate on particular solutions. Once you actually agree to the solution and what you want to do, you quickly create a prototype. And yes, you create that prototype with your client, right? With your user. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, perfect. Any other questions? Because I know I'm moving quite fast and this is quite a lot, but I also know that I'm going to leave you with an online course. So I want to make sure that you have the concept so that we can then, that you can later certify yourself in. But any other questions before we move on? Okie dokie. Moving on then. And I have my charger. Right. Talking about the different keys that we use within design thinking. First one is HILL. And that is something that we've borrowed from, it's an agile terminology that is used throughout agile development tools. It's something that's borrowed from Sun Tzu's Art of War. To anyone who's not aware of Sun Tzu, he wrote a book. He was a Chinese general at the time when the Chinese Empire was expanding, and he introduced this concept that you win a war by winning one hill at a time. So a hill is really your first, call it a problem statement, particularly. Let's say I need to ensure that I can reconcile different accounts in a bank, right? That could be a hill. A hill could be I need to ensure that my user has access to their data via their mobile. That can be a hill, right? So if you take that hill, you've taken a particular benefit and brought it to your client. Playbacks, we've heard about them before, and they are essentially your way to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Think about that picture that I showed you where everyone was in one room, that multidisciplinary team standing in one room, playing back what their understanding is to each other. And last but definitely not least, the sponsored users, sponsored users that we have, that we're taking on this journey with us. So we talked about the principles, making user your North Star, being multidisciplinary teams, and being able to actually work together with a bias towards action. We spoke about the loop, which essentially tells us to observe, reflect, and make at any given times. And we spoke about the keys, the hills, the playbacks, and the sponsored users. Coming to your first template in design thinking, it's creating an empathy map. Now, the empathy map, normally I would ask you to create this empathy map for yourself right now, but I'd like you to focus with me what is actually within this empathy map, right? So the first thing that you do is you define who your user is. And don't think of it as too much of a fictional character. I'd actually recommend to go out working with your clients and identifying a set of users that would be using the application, the solution, the problem that you're solving, whatever it may be, right? And you define that, for example, it's Clarice, the bank teller. And you write a little story about Clarice, right? You say Clarice is 25 years old. She's recently engaged. She works 9 to 5. She has XYZ as a hobby. And you actually, through that, develop empathy for who Clarice is as a person. You then go and put Clarice at the center of what you're doing, and you draw a template around Clarice, right? And you talk about what does she say, right? And these are quotes. How do they express themselves? What do they say when they need to talk to others? What they think, which is what are their expectations and reactions? What she feels, how do they feel about what they're doing? How do they feel about their job or the particular task that you're dealing with? And what do they actually do, right? And that's your first step in design thinking. If you remember, we said we observe who our user is, and this is the tool that you use to observe, right? You do that, you create this template, and you start as a team developing with post-it notes. So the most important thing that you need throughout the design thinking exercise is a whiteboard. It can be a physical whiteboard or a digital whiteboard like Murally is a great tool that you can start using. But I've also recently been introduced to tools by Microsoft and Google that essentially give you the same purpose. You come together as a team and you write down what is it that they say, think, feel, and do. You ideate, first of all, silently, and then you start working through these ideas collectively as a team, playing back to each other, arriving at your empathy map, right? Now, with empathy maps, the most important takeaway from this is that you are not your user. your product manager is not your user, your engineer is not your user, your design lead is not your user, your buyer, your implementer, your executive is not your user. Your user is the one person that when you solve this problem for them, sorry, I have a helicopter passing over my head. So with GITEX happening right now, the helicopter traffic has increased quite drastically. So I have a helicopter passing over my head every few minutes. Only the person that is going to use this application actively is your user. And if you understand them, you understand how to solve a problem for them. Right. Any questions on empathy maps? That was really the first tool that you take away from this session. Or maybe the second, if I think about the social contract. No questions? Melissa, nothing on the chat as well?
No, there's nothing on the chat. I think you're good to go.
Perfect. Okay. So now we're at this point where we understand who our user is. We know what they think. We know what they feel. We know what they do. Now it's time for the as-is scenario. And the as-is scenario is really as simple as it stands here in front of you today, right? I come from a strategy consultant, process consulting background. And at the time, this was just something that we do where we sit down and we try and figure out what do you need to do to complete a certain task. Now, design thinking is taking this to another level because it's talking about, first of all, what are the steps that you need to complete to arrive to your as-is scenario. So, for example, I want my user to have access to their reconciled bank accounts across 5 different banks, or three different products within one particular bank, right? So first thing they do is they log in. Second thing they do is they select what what product they're looking for. Third thing is maybe they need to select the type of time frame that they want to have reconciled, and at last they'll come to a point where they'll see this as a result, right? So you write down these steps. What are the steps that they need to complete to arrive at their final outcome? And then similarly, you talk about what is it that they are doing, right? What is it that they're thinking, and what is it that they're feeling throughout this? Excuse me. Once you complete this and you talk about what are they doing, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, together as a group, you need to start thinking about where are the biggest problem areas. And you can do that, again, with simple tick marks, with circles, with voting of some kind. And there you start identifying what are the biggest pain points in this, right? The reason this is normally a 5-hour to 1-day exercise is because we actually take an example and we work through it together. Here, my biggest focus is to make sure that I'm imparting the knowledge on you and sharing the reference material with you so that you can start doing it as individual groups, right? So when you look at the as-is scenario, when you're thinking about what they're doing and how you're going to start calling it out, you're thinking about what are the points of inefficiency, right? When you're thinking about what they're thinking, you're thinking about what are points of confusion that you can clarify. And when you're talking about what are the pain points, you're really talking about what are they feeling. So yes, this is very empathetic and might seem like something that is soft, but quickly when you start actually digging deeper on it, you'll realize that this is something where you can actually start defining what is it that you need to solve as soon as you're at the as-is scenario and understand the empathy. And at the end of defining the as-is scenario, at the end of everything that you do, you play it back to the group that you're working with. right? So by doing that, you allow yourself to gain a deeper understanding of this user that you're working with, and you understand what are they doing, what are they thinking, what are they feeling while they're completing a particular task. And from there, you'll be able to define areas of improvement, which is, you know, in a traditional scenario, we start with that. We're like, okay, this is probably a horrible process. Let's improve it by doing this. I have a great idea. I'm a great startup. I'm going to start using this. When you look at design thinking does this, but it doesn't do it early on in the process, and it doesn't do it so in a forced way. It's actually taking the user on the journey, identifying what is it that they're doing, thinking, feeling, and saying, and where the particular pain points are. Now, once you've identified the particular pain points, before I actually move on to ideation, is there any question on the as-is scenario? All righty, cool. Again, I'm happy that I'd be probing a little bit more for questions, but I understand that also you're working with a particular time frame, and I'm going to be sharing a repository with you where you can actually go and access all of this information that I'm sharing with you at your own pace, and then also become certified at your own pace. Right. So now you're at this point where you identify who the person is that you're working with. You identify who what the process is, the as-is process that they're working with today, and what are the particular pain points. Now, once you've identified particular pain points, and essentially, again, it's something that we jump directly to conclusions, you start ideating, right? You start ideating with big ideas, right? These ideas are large and broad and conceptual, but they always tie back to a particular need of the user, right? So it's tied back to something that they say or feel, that they do or think. And you do that by taking, let's say, a mobile app with a gift catalog, which is really just a feature, and taking it one step further and saying, you know, a virtual and physical space to perpetuate gratitude that benefits everyone, right? And then maybe one of them could be sharing pictures via a mobile app. So try and stay as conceptual as possible, as high level as possible, so that later on so at this stage you don't get lost in particular features just yet, but you start ideating for big ticket items and tie them back to your as-is scenario and to your empathy map. Now that's something I personally am not great at, but you know, if you have an artistic person within your team, I would strongly recommend that you start drawing them out, because when you're working with a business, when you're working with users, what these methodologies sometimes do is they make this work rigid. When you start actually drawing it out, it adds a little bit of fun to the environment. Do you have to draw? No. You have to sketch? Definitely not. But if you can and if you know how to, it's a great way to engage with your users, right? So you're focusing on your users' pain points. You're trying to stay away from feature functions. You don't want to go into too much detail, and you want to be obeying the laws of physics, right? If my problem is that I have traffic on the way to work, the big idea can't be that they're going to beam me to work. So it needs to be something that is within the bounds of physics. When you're working in a team, I'd recommend that you'd have no less than 3 big ideas per team member. And then again, you go back and you reflect to the wider group, and you do so as a group, right? You play back, and there everyone gets to present their idea, right? And we don't do that by actually shooting down the big idea. No, we listen to the big idea. We don't talk about how feasible and how difficult it is, right? Try not to defend the idea too much. Try to go with the flow and and hear what people have to say. And these big ideas, while you're playing them back, is a great way to actually develop more empathy for your user, right? So how do we quickly identify a range of possibilities to meet our users' needs? We do ideation. Now, we come to the point where we have a constant bias towards action. And here we're going to look at something called a storyboard, right? Which in old school consulting terms was a to-be process model, right? We had an as-is process model and we have a to-be process model. Now, the to-be process is really the storyboard, right? And that's the story where you take this user that you've defined very early on in your process, and you take them on a journey of how things would be like if you could implement these big ideas, right? The way you do that is, again, something very, very simple, where you just take Post-it notes on a whiteboard, physical or digital, and you start drawing out the different aspects of the story and writing quick descriptions for them, talking about how good the person is now, you know, going through their life because they have these big ideas that they could work with, right? And this is a great way, and one of the, you know, it's an early prototype. I'd even say it's a prototype of a prototype, even, where you sit down next to your business users, and together you work out what is it that the story would look like if your users' issues and problems have been dealt with, right? You share your storyboards and you make sure that you share them with the entire team working together. And what you'll realize quickly is that if you have multiple people on the team, multiple storyboards, is that slowly but surely you'll see similarities of thinking in the group. And that's when you find that you could have maybe quick wins that everyone agrees with, right? So the way we iterate, I mean, we communicate these big ideas so that they are visually aligned to everyone while staying focused on the user's needs. That's how you use storyboards. Now, last but not least, we'll come to prototypes. Yes, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, I didn't get that much the difference between ideation and storyboard, because both of them, I mean, the team need to gather together and to reflect the points, the pain points of the user needs, and also the storyboard. I mean, it's a to-be process to take the user, define them, and take them to a journey on how things will be like when implementing those ideas.
I think you've actually answered your question already yourself. So let's reflect. Let's reflect on it together. So, and it's a good question, right? Because it's not a clear distinction. It's a minor distinction that is important to make. So how did you arrive at the big ideas? The big ideas, you looked at the as-is process, and you looked at what they're doing, thinking, and feeling, identifying certain areas of concerns or issues, where you then identify, okay, so let's say Saqr has a problem checking into his flight. Maybe and that's it. We stop there, because as is, Saqr has a problem checking into his flight. The big idea can be, we need to ensure that Saqr doesn't have issues checking into his flight, with a feature being, oh, maybe we enable a mobile booking experience. Right, so that's the big idea. At the time of the big idea, you're not necessarily concerned about how you're going to integrate this big idea into the user's environment. Once you actually take, yes, go ahead.
But on the storyboard, are we anticipating what could happen next after implementing the ideas?
Correct. That's exactly right, which is why I said you've already answered your own question actually while asking it.
Thank you so much.
Yes, no, it's a pleasure. So you take those big ideas and you put them in a storyboard, putting them in the context of your user's to-be scenario, right? So Saqr will have a mobile app. He will not have to go to his to the airport early. Therefore, Saqr can download the mobile app checking online and just go to his flight directly, right? So in one part you're coming up with the big idea, and the other part you're creating the big idea. You're integrating the big idea to the user's story. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much for your answers.
Perfect, with pleasure. All righty, the last thing, and we're actually good on time. We have another 5 minutes left. The last thing that would be left to do is to prototype, right? And when prototyping, I would recommend that you take whatever you are comfortable with, right? There's people comfortable with cardboard. I'm personally most comfortable with paper. There's people comfortable with Lego. And the idea is there, you're creating something, right? So we're not talking about Saqr having a mobile app to check into his flight. No, we're talking about this is what, doing a screen, and you can see it over here, over there, on the yellow paper. You actually say Saqr, we'll see his name here, his flight details there. And what you'll quickly realize when you actually approach it like that, you'll be able to take your user, your executive, your entire team throughout, and if it was your own team or your client's team, take them on the story by just having a few sketches on paper or Lego or different figurines as you see them there. And the idea really is to stay on low fidelity, because and I'll find out about the study and if possible share it with you. But I'm pretty sure about having read a study, and it makes actually a good sense to me as well, how you actually, when you make things more simple, when you ensure that they are low fidelity, how it will be much more, you'll be able to gain much more feedback from the users that you're dealing with, because they won't feel bad about shooting something down that took you 20 minutes to create. Whereas if you go away for 2 weeks and you come back and there's something, really fancy and sexy looking that you share, you might not actually get as positive or as open feedback as you get during the low fidelity prototypes, right? So prototypes are a means of exploring a user experience through a low fidelity representation of design and communicating them through a visual tool. So I did promise you that you'll be able to go online and get your own badge. So if you follow me to ibm.design, ibm.com/design/thinking, if you go to this website here, you'll be able to log in and you'll be able to create an account. That account, you can create it for free. And after you log in to this, after you log in, essentially what will happen is that you'll have access to the Enterprise Design Thinking Practitioner tool, and you can actually sign up on this course, develop, try yourself out a little bit more on the concepts that I shared with you, and then be able to get this badge of education that is issued by IBM. And again, it's free for everyone, so anyone can go and do it. And you can download a lot of reference materials from there, a lot of templates. It goes into much more detail than what I've provided you here in other topics. And you'll be able to actually call yourself an Enterprise Design Thinking Practitioner. If there's nothing you take away from this session, please take away the fact that you are not your user. And anytime you find yourself in a position where you are making decisions, or find yourself in a position where you are making decisions based on your users, it's probably the right time to stop and involve your user. Alrighty. I hope I didn't rap while I was speaking. I was trying to get through this within an hour. I'm glad that we had questions throughout, but maybe there's more questions right now. So any questions, I'm here. Cool. So I hope that I stayed true to what I was saying in the beginning, that I will make this as simple as possible to make sure that everyone understands this. So it means that everyone understood it. Go ahead.
Saqr, yeah, Saqr, sorry. I think Asma has another question.
Yeah,
And,
sure. Go ahead, Asma.
Yeah, Asma.
I have a question. Is a video representing the idea considered as a prototype?
It's a good question. So I wouldn't call it a low fidelity prototype, because obviously creating a video is rather time intensive, depending on how good you are with this. But it could be thought of as a prototype. It wouldn't be one that I would recommend much. No, a prototype is more something.
Especially that we are using a B2B model, so we're quite far from our main users. So we mainly need a video so that we can represent our ideas.
I'd respectfully challenge that, right? Because we're all far away from each other right now. I wouldn't be surprised if we have 5, 6, 7 different countries on this call right now. I saw a gentleman joining from Germany. I saw, I heard someone with a North African accent. I'm sitting here in Dubai. I know Melissa, depending on what day of the week it is, she's either here or in Lebanon. There are online collaboration tools today where you can actually get your user on a whiteboard together and you can draw it out, right?
Yes,
so while I wouldn't disagree with having a video, I would recommend maybe thinking about this maybe in a more simple way, where you can just get them on a white screen, right? And think of paint. Let's not make this difficult, right? Think of just having paint, and you draw out on paint what the idea is looking like, right? And you start getting feedback on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I think let us give the floor for Amr Youssef from Finflix. He has a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. When it comes to user feedback, or like studying and doing the ideation with your user, usually we all are aware of the groups that especially do that as a service. But for someone like us, like as a startup that you're still in the early stage, are there like resources or strategies where you can acquire these users that are happy to share the feedback? Usually, because we're also in the business to business kind of strategy, usually it's corporates that they are not very happy to have sessions and give like lots of feedback unless the product is ready. But when it comes to ideation, you need someone to sit to open up their heart, tell you about their pain points. And you also, based on my studies, you need to give them the floor to completely open up and give you what they're thinking. Do you have any kind of helpful notes on how do you approach these people to let them open up and let you know about their pain points, so you can build your product on an accurate feedback from customers, not just assumptions?
Right, I hear you. First of all, thank you for the positive feedback. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. And yes, particularly in the parts of the world we live in, sometimes it's very difficult to get the time of day with someone if you don't actually have something to show them. Right. Having said that, with design thinking and going and this could be your door opener. You can tell them, hey, I'm a design thinking practitioner. I've learned this methodology and I'm applying this methodology. And this methodology is co-creation. It doesn't work with me providing something to you. Yes, of course, there are certain requirements that you need to meet, but hey, can you identify 1 or 2 people for me that are using this, that are facing this problem that you're trying to solve today, that can work with me, right? And I know it's easier said than done. I've been there myself, but when applying design thinking, it is absolutely vital that you have someone as a representation from the business or from a user's point of view working with you. If you're working in isolation, you're not doing design thinking, right? You can do it maybe in as part of your own team, but so the way I would approach it, or the way I have approached it previously, is to actually go away from, you know, we are your supplier and you are our vendor, or you are the buyer and we are the software provider. Moving away from that to co-creation, right? And this is, you know, in today's world, when we were saying this 5 years ago, this was news, and, you know, everyone was like, you're crazy, right? In today's world, co-creation is a trend that is available in the entire region, in multiple different industries, regardless of if you're business to consumer, or business to business, or business to government. The concept of co-creation is now one that is there. So I would strongly implore that, you know, maybe if the person you're dealing with right now isn't too positive towards that, you go through the different stakeholders that you have until you have someone who will buy into this co-creation exercise. Because the whole idea is we're moving away from this waterfall model, which is, here's your requirement, here's your product, then we do the testing, then we go to the client, to something that is, in the, you know, in the meaning of the world, more agile. The reason it's more agile is that you're doing this together. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you so much, Saqr.